G'day, and welcome to ComicsMATE, your mates in comics from the land down under. I'm Dean James, and today we're going to be talking about the one thing that has ruined Batman the Caped Crusader.
Here we go.
And this is a show that I was extremely excited about, as you can see in some of my older videos. A show that had so much potential to be great. The 40s aesthetic, Matt Reeves and Bruce Timm working behind the scenes with famed comic book writer Ed Brubaker. But they squandered all of that talent and sacrificed yet another show at the feet of the woke altar for an audience that was never going to watch their show in the first place. You see, there's one big problem with Batman Caped Crusader: the character designs. And this is more than just some ugly characters. We're talking about race swaps that make absolutely no sense for a show that supposedly takes place in the 40s, gender swaps that are ultimately a detriment to characters that were otherwise interesting and could have stood up on their own merit, forced LGBT inclusions, and last but not least, the absolute bastardization of established characters, taking away anything that has been seen as interesting about them. But before we get into all of that, please like this video to help push it out into the algorithm, and subscribe so you don't miss any of my future videos. Now let's jump right into it. Let's start with the race swaps, because there's so many of them. Every second character in this show has been race swapped, including half of the police, a bunch of the lawyers, and high status citizens, but let's just focus on the main ones. Detective Flass is no longer a wisecracking blonde man who thinks himself the greatest detective to ever live, and is instead a tall, mean, corrupt black man in a pimp suit.
Who are you?
My name is a pimp named Slickback, and I believe I may have misplaced some merchandise at this residence. There she is.
I have no problem with this new character. In fact, he was pretty cool. But the fact remains that he isn't Detective Flass at all. Then we have Commissioner Gordon, and by extension, his daughter Barbara. You know, Batgirl, who is no longer a teenager who idolized Batman, and is instead a rude, standoffish, quite frankly bitchy and unlikable lawyer for the city of Gotham. Now this is supposed to be the 40s, right? So it makes no sense that we would have a high-ranked police officer in Commissioner Gordon, or his daughter to be in these positions of power. If this was set in modern day, this wouldn't be a problem, but because it's clearly the 40s, you can't help but notice these characters are out of place and break your sense of immersion with just their looks. Fact of the matter is, in the 40s, there would never be a black commissioner. To put it simply, they were just racist back then. A lot of black people weren't even allowed to go into certain buildings at that time, and most people, even the police, would have refused to take orders from a black person.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What the hell you think you're doing, boy?
And that's before I get into how they act. This Commissioner Gordon is a perfectly fine character, but he isn't the Gordon we know as fans of Batman. I found myself missing Jim as this show went on, because he doesn't act like him, he doesn't look like him, he actually looks more like Lucius Fox. He is a completely different person. So why did they feel the need to make what is essentially a brand new character a race swap of a beloved established character? We all know why. This problem continues as we get into some of the other points, but I'll elaborate on them when I get there. And as for the people behind these creative decisions, they don't see this as a problem, despite knowing that it is. When asked about these race-swapped characters, Donald Moffat, who is an executive at Warner Bros. Animation, had this to say.
We've kind of got to tell a lie. We'll go back into history and there will be black people where, historically, there wouldn't have been, and we won't dwell on that. We'll say, to hell with it. This is the imaginary, better version of the world. By believing in it, we'll summon it forth.
Then why set it in the 40s at all? It's like they just wanted the fashion and the vehicles from the 40s, but have all of the social norms of modern day. The way you all promoted this was Batman in the 40s, which could have led to some really interesting stories surrounding all of that sort of stuff, but instead you choose to ignore it for no other reason than you just don't care. That's some bullshit, honestly. Now this next thing is the thing that everyone watching this video knows is going to be brought up. The gender-swapped penguin, Oswalder Cobblepot. Besides the name Oswalder being absolutely ridiculous, that's not even a name for one. You just added an A to the end of Oswald. Could you be any less creative? As stupid as that is, that's not my biggest problem with this character. My problem with her is that she was an interesting and straight-up evil bitch in her own right. She had nothing in common with the Penguin outside of the tacked-on umbrella-themed cannon she uses at the end of her episode, but honestly, she would have been a far more compelling character if they had just made her a completely original character. It's like the writers of the show didn't believe in their own writing, so they felt compelled to tack on a recognizable name to legitimize this mob boss, who, as I said, was interesting and compelling all on her her own. Making her a gender swap was ultimately the weakest part of her entire shtick. This honestly baffles me because she was evil as hell, and interesting on her own. She didn't need to be a gender-swapped penguin, and they really missed an opportunity here to have their own unique character, who would be a memorable villain all of their own. But that leads me into my next point, the forced LGBT inclusion episode. And I say episode because there's literally one episode just dedicated to this, and if you skip the episode, you would never know it's there. Like I suspect they will do when the show is released in China. I'm talking of course about the Harley Quinn episode, in which a Chinese Harley Quinn goes on a date with Detective Montoya, another two characters who wouldn't exist in the 40s. Unlike the Penguin though, this Harley Quinn absolutely sucks, and is Harley in name only. They essentially removed everything about her that made her interesting, and dumbed her down to the point that she's little more than a lesbian with a god-awful costume, who spends all of her time torturing rich white men. No, really. Her entire shtick is that she kidnaps her clients so she can lock them in tiny rooms and make them perform self-harming struggle sessions on themselves and each other. And her design is just disgusting. Honestly, it's so damn ugly. I can't stress that enough. It's like they went out of their way to make the least appealing design possible for their poorly thought out overweight lesbian. This character has nothing in common with the classic Harley Quinn, and is nothing more than a blank slate that they could slap the lesbian label on in the most embarrassing way possible. This goes back to my first point too. The two fat lesbians in this episode go on a date at a fancy restaurant, and even kiss in public, which in the 40s would completely ruin their careers. A public display of affection like that would have them fired and their lives ruined because it was seen as shameful and wrong. Hell, they might even be hunted down and murdered for such things back in those days. Again, they should have set this show in modern day, if they were just going to pretend it's the same anyway. Then none of this would be an issue. This is episode 5, and is by far the worst episode of the lot. The story is boring, the characters are gross looking, Batman doesn't even save the day. He is instead rescued by the race-swapped Barbara, who, as I mentioned earlier, is a complete unlikable girl boss. Which I should mention is a common occurrence in this show. Batman is constantly playing second fiddle to these other race-swapped characters, and in most episodes wouldn't have even won without the help of either Barbara or Detective Montoya. The few small moments we get with Batman is good, but there's way too little of it to save the show overall. It's no wonder this show is getting destroyed by critics and audiences alike. Last I checked, it was on a measly 52% on Rotten Tomatoes. The one good thing this show has done is it's put the final nail in the coffin that was fans thinking Bruce Timm was more than just a hack who had leached off Paul Dini's creative genius for the original Batman the Animated Series. Without him involved, anything Bruce Timm works on turns into little more than his barely disguised fetishes. The more I think about it, the more annoyed I become. If you're a fan of Batman, this show won't satisfy you, and if you're not, you probably won't be watching it anyway. This show had so much potential, and they squandered it all for some has-been hack's ego. Fuck this show, fuck Bruce Timm, and fuck DC and Warner Brothers for allowing this to happen. At least the animation is better than X-Men 97. But that's all I have for you today. My name's Dean James, your mate in comics from the land down under. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys again next time.